Seth. On behalf of the Tri-Town Democratic Town Committees of Nahant, Swampscott, and Marblehead, welcome to the first 6th District Democratic Congressional Debate for 2020. Our three communities have worked together for many years on a variety of political and charitable projects. I've been privileged to work with Debbie Friedlander of Swampscott and Renee Keeney of Marblehead on this particular project, as well as Jim Peterson, formerly of Nahant, currently of Swampscott, who probably has his eyes on Marblehead as well. I might add that Jim Peterson was almost named Citizen of the Year in Nahant when he lived here, and he deserved it, even though he never got it officially. May I also mention my indebtedness to Ralph Edwards of Swampscott, with whom I worked closely for more than a decade, and his predecessor as Swampscott Chair, Margaret Summer, as well as Marilyn Siegel and the late Phil Sweeney of Marblehead. You've all been part of a warm democratic community. May I also ask that the viewing audience at the outset, if you want to comment on either the content or the form or in any way on the proceedings tonight, simply email nahantdemocrats@gmail.com. The participants in tonight's debate are Congressman Seth Bolton, Mr. Angus Mcquilkin, and Ms. Jamie Belcito. Angus Mcquilkin was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and is a graduate of the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He has been active in education, the nonprofit world, politics, and the private sector for the last 30 years. He was a co-founder of the Young Democrats of Massachusetts and vice president of Planned Parenthood, a co-founder of the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence, and a lecturer at LaSalle University. He is currently a business development executive at a major law firm. Angus lives in Topsfield with his wife, Diana, and together they have 4 children, ages 9 to 17. Seth Bolton was born in Salem and grew up in Marblehead. He attended Phillips Academy and Harvard University. Shortly before 9/11, he joined the Marines and served in Iraq until 2008. He was awarded a Bronze Star. After leaving the Marines, he returned to Harvard, where he received a master's degree in business and public policy. After a brief stint in the private sector, he ran for Congress and was elected in 2014. Congressman Bolton briefly sought the Democratic nomination for president in 2019. He lives in Salem with his wife Liz and their young daughter. Jamie Soloway Belcito was born in Wakefield and grew up in Reading. After graduating from Salem State, she worked as an intern to Congressman Joe Moakley. During her career in human resources at several Massachusetts companies, she was also active as an advocate for immigrants, workers, women, and children. One of her main interests concerned the burden of postpartum depression, particularly for low-income women. She was appointed a trustee at Salem State by Governor Baker in 2016, the same year she became a Democrat as a result of the election of Donald Trump. Jamie lives in Topsfield with her husband and 2 children. I'll now turn the proceedings over to Jim Peterson, but let me remind you, if you have any comments, write nahantdemocrats@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you everyone who is watching. Let me get to my notes. So let me go through the ground rules that I have just gone through briefly with the candidates. We will begin with a 3-minute opening by each candidate. They have drawn lots to determine the order of the opening. That will be followed by questions in which each candidate will get 1.5 minutes to respond. The questions have been organized by the 3 chairs who Jim just mentioned and myself, and are mostly based on questions submitted by the public. We invited people in the public to submit questions by email. After those questions, Rather than a back and forth, because we are trying to maximize the number of questions we can get in, rather than a back and forth during the forum, each candidate will be given 1.5 minutes to reply to anything that was said earlier or to expand on anything that they said earlier. And that will be followed by a 2-minute closing statement for each candidate. Debbie Friedlander, the chair of the Swampscott Town Committee, is keeping track of time and has flashcards which the candidates have seen. Do any of the candidates have any questions about what we'll be doing? Then I think we're ready to start. The first question will be the only question that is slightly different for the incumbent and the challengers. Our media sponsor for tonight was the Essex Media Group, the Daily Item of Lynn, and La Voce of Lynn. And 2 of the questions will come from the Daily Item. The first is from Thor Jorgensen, the news editor of the Item. And the question is, in 2014, Congressman Moulton said that he would prioritize plans to help bring innovative business to Lynn. Mr. Jorgensen asks that you update us on your success in accomplishing that goal, and if you could also add what you have done for other cities in the district. Mr. Moulton.
Jim, I'd be happy to do that, but I think we should do opening statements.
I think we're doing the openings.
Yes. Now you know what the first question is.
Lots of time to prepare. Thanks for the heads up.
So, and the openings go in a different order. Angus Mcquilkin, give us your 3-minute opening, please.
Great. Jim, thank you. I want to thank our hosts. I want to thank our media sponsors for organizing tonight's forum. I think it's going to be an important conversation for voters. My name is Angus Mcquilkin. As Jim Walsh pointed out, I'm from Topsfield. I live there with my wife, Diane, who is here with us tonight. And it is true, between us, we have 4 children. I'm glad to be here in this region tonight. I have a lot of local roots here. My great-grandmother, Mary Flynn, when she first came to the United States in 1911, she settled in Lynn. My father lived in Marblehead, and so I, as a young person, got to spend every other weekend with my dad in Marblehead, and it's when I first fell in love with the North Shore and with this beautiful region of our state. There's a number of things I want people to know about me as a person and as a candidate who are viewing this debate tonight. First is, I am a parent, but I'm also a teacher. As was pointed out in my introduction, I teach at LaSalle University. I teach undergraduates, have the opportunity to mentor young people in communications. But the second hat I wear is I'm a coalition builder. And I've spent the past 30 years building coalitions of progressives and passing legislation that's making a difference in people's lives. I did co-found the Young Democrats in Massachusetts and then built a coalition of support for the motor voter law. I spent 11 years serving as chief of staff for Senator Cheryl Jakes in the Massachusetts Senate, where we worked in coalition to secure and protect marriage equality. She was our state's first openly lesbian senator. I had the opportunity to serve as chair of the Massachusetts Coalition for Choice during my years at Planned Parenthood, where we won important victories for access to emergency contraception. And then after the massacre of children and educators in Newtown, Connecticut, I co-founded the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. And that's really been my life's work as an advocate to make sure that we have in Massachusetts the most effective gun laws in the nation, and we do. Another hat I wear is I've been a builder of our innovation economy. I spent much of the past decade as a state economic development official working at the Massachusetts Life Sciences Center to implement Governor Deval Patrick's Life Sciences Initiative to make us #1 in the world in life sciences. And it's through that initiative we created tens of thousands of jobs across the state, including many thousands of jobs here in the 6th Congressional District. And the last thing I want you to know is that I'm the only lifelong progressive Democrat running to represent you in Congress, and we'll talk tonight about why that should be important to you. I'll put forward 6 priorities for the 6th Congressional District. 6 priorities because I don't see us in Washington actually getting anything accomplished on any of these priorities. We are not making any headway. If anything, we're taking steps backward. So tonight you'll hear me talk about 3 priorities tied directly to COVID-19: economic recovery, healthcare access, and education. And 3 priorities that we still need to confront as a society and have not addressed yet: gun violence prevention, the climate crisis, and transportation. We're calling this the Campaign for Change. I urge you to visit my website during the debate, which is just angusforcongress.com, and learn more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McQuilkin. Jamie Balsito.
Yes, thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me here this evening. My name is Jamie Zalloway Belcedo. I'm a progressive leader, an education activist, a mental health advocate, a policy expert, a women's rights champion, a mother, and a wife. I am the everyday person, a kid who grew up in a working class home. My father is still a union floor layer. I'm a graduate of the Reading Public School System, and I am a first-generation graduate of Salem State College. I am the great-granddaughter of Syrian refugees. I'm a mom worried about my 2 young daughters going back to school. I'm a daughter concerned about my parents' health during this pandemic. And I'm a person that knows what it means to lose your job, have no health insurance, and worry about keeping a roof over your family's head. Now more than ever, this district needs a representative who knows how to make government work for the people of the district. My mentor, the legendary J. Joseph Moakley, loved taking care of people in his district. He taught me that being a public servant is a source of joy. I have used the skills I learned from him to help pass legislation that has leveled the playing field for the everyday person. I have a proven track record of achievements in Capitol Hill as a private citizen. I have successfully shepherded legislation through the halls of Congress on national policies that have addressed how this country treats women, families, immigrants, and students. I want to be the voice of the 6th District in Washington, the voice of the American worker, families, mothers, the LGBTQI community, disabled, public students, public school students, educators, immigrants, the voices that are right here that have not been represented. We need a strong voice in Congress willing to speak up for the rest of us, a voice for all of us, a voice that has been missing, and I am that voice. Thank you.
And Congressman Seth Bolton, and thank you for correcting me on the order. Right after I said what we were going to do, I did something different.
Jim, my pleasure, and thank you so much for moderating this debate. Good evening, everyone. I'm Seth Bolton, and for the last 5 years, I have had the privilege of serving you in Congress. Thank you all for tuning in tonight, to our hosts here in Nahant, and to Jamie and Angus for throwing your hats in the ring. Our community and our party are stronger when we have in-depth conversations about the issues that really matter. I ran for Congress 5 years ago on a platform of change. I unseated an incumbent who had spent 18 years in Congress and only passed 1 bill. And I made a promise that election night to everybody in this district. I promised to fight as hard as I can, and not for what's popular, but for you and this country, and most of all, for what's right. I promised to bring a new generation of leadership to Washington, to fix a broken Congress that sent me to fight in a war that I disagreed with, because not enough people had the courage to speak out against it. Today, in many ways, that same Congress is still failing Americans as we confront a pandemic and record job loss. Democrats taking control of the House in 2018 have certainly helped make Congress work better, but we still have a long way to go. That's why I've never stopped fighting for change, because that's the only way you ever make progress. I've successfully closed more than 5,000 constituent cases for this district and returned nearly $3 million to people here who are owed money from the government but didn't receive it. I have passed bills to modernize dated government institutions like the VA and the RMV, and to expand mental health care and make it easier for everyone to access. Who else in Congress can say that they've secured more than $1 billion for their district? In the last year alone, I've delivered more than $1 billion in investments to Lynn, and just last week passed $250 million more. That's success that we can measure in the jobs and livelihoods of families in this district. Excuse me for a second. Tonight, you're going to hear I fought for families whose houses exploded in the Merrimack Valley pipeline disaster and helped kick Columbia Gas out of Massachusetts. But things changed 4 years ago when President Trump was elected, and I recognized that to tackle climate change or pass universal health care or gun reform, we had to stop President Trump's xenophobic, hateful agenda. So I started Serve America, recruiting a new generation of leaders to Congress who won 22 seats in the House of Representatives, 18 of them flipping from red to blue. So that's the record upon which I'm running for election. And you're probably going to hear accusations from my political opponents tonight because that's how it works. I get it. But I'm proud of my record, and I'm happy to defend it. And I look forward I'm looking forward tonight to talking about taking us forward. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Congressman Bolton. And you've already heard the first question, but I'll repeat it. From Thor Jorgensen, the news editor of the Lynn Item. In 2014, you said that you would prioritize plans to bring innovative business to Lynn. Can you update us on your success in that and in the other cities in the district?
Absolutely. You know, I made that promise to the city of Lynn, even though I knew that some other places I went in the district would say, hey, what about us? But Lynn is the gateway to this district. It has so much potential as a city right on the water just north of Boston, and yet much of that potential is unrealized. One of the things that we talked about doing in Lynn was making it a center for advanced manufacturing. And over the past 2 years, I have brought $1.2 billion, that's billion with a B, $1.2 billion in advanced manufacturing to the district, to GE Lynn, and also set up workforce training, especially for women and people of color. Securing COVID testing for grocery store and transportation workers is also something that I've done in recent history, and that's so important because there are so many of those workers in Lynn. But perhaps the most unheralded part of the work that we do for Lynn is the constituent services work. We have served so many constituents who have come into our office for help. So many that we've returned $3 million to over 5,000 constituents in this district, many of them from the city of Lynn. Many of them struggling to have a better future, who just need a little bit of help. Our immigration work is actually one of our hallmarks in our office, and we know that Lynn is a gateway community, an immigrant community, and we're very proud to make it a community that now is hiring, is looking forward to the future, and growing right here at home.
Thank you, Congressman. For the challengers, what would you have done for Lynn, and what do you plan to do for Lynn and the other cities in the district? Beginning with Jamie Balsito.
Sure, thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. You know, Lynn is the largest populated city in the entire district, and I just want to point out that there's 38 communities throughout the entire district, and that the western part of the district is equally as important when it comes to our economy, but we'll be talking about that in Burlington. I have been speaking with the Main Streets program in Lynn during this pandemic. Lynn's the 4th hardest hit in this COVID that we're seeing. The numbers are off the charts, and that's been affecting their main streets. What I want to see is the Fed Main Street Lending Program taking the $600 billion that the government has allocated to small businesses and make that be available to community banks to guarantee loans for small businesses, those who don't qualify for federal funds, like undocumented individuals in the community. I want to make sure that we are reshoring and bringing our manufacturing capabilities back to this district, and I have been speaking with companies like Caroline, who is producing PPE and medical grade materials to deliver to our schools who still don't have the money for the PPE that we need in the fall, and those are the sorts of things that I'm taking a look at, so thank you.
Thank you. Angus Mcquilkin, what will you do for Lynn and the other cities?
Sure. I've spent a lot of time in Lynn during this campaign, most recently at the commuter rail station, handed out masks to commuters who were heading into work, where I met commuters heading in and I met commuters heading out, overnight shift workers at MGH who were coming home from work. And you know, my priorities for Lynn, there are 5 that are immediate and important. One is economic development. I think I'm the only candidate in this race who has a background in economic development. I spent 9 years working to bring innovative companies to Massachusetts and many to this region. I think we can build on that progress by bringing life sciences companies into Lynn, by bringing next generation clean tech companies into Lynn, which I think is our next big economic opportunity. Transportation. vital importance in Lynn. I am somebody who believes we both need to extend the Blue Line and electrify the commuter rail line so we can do more frequent, cleaner, greener shuttles to and from North Station. And I'd like to see the ferry reinstated. I think the pilot program was not given an adequate chance to work. Education, we have a crisis potentially ahead of us in education funding for all of our communities. It's going to be of particular importance for Lynn that we make sure we get enough federal aid to prevent the devastating education cuts that may be ahead of us because of COVID-19. And housing. Housing is a vitally important issue in Lynn. I hope it's one we get to talk about tonight. I'll talk about it now, but we're out of time.
Thank you. Next question. Police killings, especially of people of color, have led to demonstrations all over the country, including Lynn, Swampscott, Marblehead, and Nahant. Question from Ken Thompson, the Democratic chair of Boxford. He would like to know your views on the root causes of police violence and how it can be reduced. Congressman Moulton.
Is there systemic racism in this country? Yes, there is. And in the last few months, we've learned how prevalent that is right here at home. I recently hosted a town hall with Reverend Ande Bennett in Lynn, a truly inspiring community leader. He's about my age. We compared notes, we're about the same size. He told a story about getting pulled over right here in the district because he had an expired registration on his car. The truth of the matter is that he had renewed it, he had done it online, and he forgot to print out the receipt. And after he told that story about getting pulled over and arrested for that expired registration, this local preacher, community leader, I talked about how I had been pulled over for the same offense, except I hadn't renewed my registration. I had just forgotten to do it. Was I led away in handcuffs? No. I was told to go do it tomorrow. I was very proud to be an original co-sponsor of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that will take important steps to reforming police in this country, banning chokeholds, making sure that bad cops don't get passed from one department to the next. But we have to do more than that. We have to fundamentally reform the relationship that police have with the communities that they are there to protect and to serve. And I look forward to the opportunity to talking more about that this evening.
Thank you. Jamie Balsito.
Sure.
What are the root causes of police violence and how can it be reduced?
Thank you, Jim. You know, I'm going to talk about the fact that we need to be focusing our working with our police and making sure that they're community partners. That is something that I think that when we take a look at police departments like Gloucester have done a very good job. We need to be taking a look at de-escalation training. We need to be continually talking about racial profiling. I was speaking with Ken actually about the fact when I was at Salem State as a freshman, Rodney King, the beating of Rodney King happened. Here we are, 28 years later, and we're still talking about the same stuff. What we just saw the Massachusetts State Legislature pass with their police reform bill, we need to be speaking about that. We have to start speaking about putting money into social services, mental health, domestic violence, substance use. That's why I was referencing Gloucester. These are the things that help build communities, and we need to be speaking about implicit bias at every single turn, and that comes with training and open discussion. It's time to do the hard work. Thank you.
Thank you. Angus McQuilkin, the root causes of police violence and
Root causes of police violence, from my perspective, include inadequate screening of police officers up front to make sure that we're hiring the type of people who ought to be carrying a badge and a gun. Systemic racism is certainly one of those root causes. And the militarization of our police forces, I think, is one of the root causes. I've been part of these protests. I've gone out and joined with some of the really courageous young people who have organized these protests around the district. I spoke at one in Peabody. I attended a number of others. And one thing I've had the opportunity to do is to spend some time with these young people who have been organizing these protests and talk about where we go from here. I think regionalizing our efforts so we can amplify people's voices and their demand for change is an important next step. And that's why I've signed on as an early supporter and now member of a regional effort to form a North Shore chapter of the NAACP. And I think that's going to give people an avenue for ongoing advocacy around these issues. In terms of reform, I support certification of police officers so we can have that upfront screening to make sure that we're screening out people who want that job because they're into authority and guns, and in some cases are racist. I think we certainly need to deal with some of the issues that are confronting us now, like banning chokeholds. I think we need to reverse the trend toward militarization of our police departments. Let's talk more about that tonight. I think the answer is community policing. Community policing is the time-proven method of building deep relationships in our communities where police are working in concert with the residents of our communities rather than in conflict with the residents of our communities.
Thank you. Moving from police violence to civilian gun violence, millions of guns are in civilian hands in the United States, and the deaths of tens of thousands of Americans each year involve guns. Aaron Stevens North from Billerica asks what actions you have taken regarding gun violence and what you will do about it in the future. Mr. McQuilkin.
This issue has been my life's work. I co-founded the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence after Newtown because I wanted to bring voices together and amplify them to demand change. We have in Massachusetts, over a period of 30 years, and I've been working on this issue for that long, passed the most effective gun laws in the country. We have the lowest gun death rate of any state in America to show for it. We have created a model that works for the nation. But the political courage has not been there to address this issue nationally. It has not been addressed nationally for decades. What I want to see us do is take the Massachusetts model, which has been proven to work. We have the data to back it up. A model that relies on decision-making by local police chiefs to make licensing decisions about who can and is not suitable to own a firearm. That model is what we need to apply nationally, along with a renewed ban on military-style assault weapons and high-capacity ammunition magazines. And could we at least pass universal background checks on every gun sale at every purchase? 95% of the public supports this. It's only the NRA that stands in the way. What I think we need to do is build a broad-based national coalition of support, like what I did here in Massachusetts, that will demand action and not take no for an answer on meaningful and effective national gun laws. We had a record number of gun deaths in this country last year. This problem is only getting worse, and it will continue to get worse until we actually do something about it. It's affected our own kids in their schools. It's not something that we can consider acceptable in our society. We need to confront this crisis. It was a crisis before the COVID-19 crisis, and we haven't taken it by the horns the way that we need to. Thank you.
Thank you. Congressman Moulton, what actions have you taken about gun violence, and what will you do in the future?
I've had to use guns for my job. I carried 2 guns almost everywhere I went in Iraq. Guns have saved my life. But I've also seen the effects of gun violence firsthand. And I know at a very personal and visceral level that has no place on our streets or in our schools. And you're right, we have not done enough, not even close to it. And it's a great example of how Congress refuses to take action because of money in politics, because of the effects of the NRA, when the vast majority of Americans support change. My voting record on gun safety legislation is unequivocal. I've been endorsed by Gabby Gifford's organization, by the Brady campaign, by the National Coalition to Stop Gun Violence because of the stance that I've taken in Congress. I led the single most bipartisan bill in recent memory to stop gun violence, which is important because we need to affect change in Congress that will last. We've done enough political messaging on this. We have got to get real change for the American people. That's what I'm fighting for every single day, to make real change, to be willing to take the risk of working across the aisle so that what we pass in the House can get also passed in the Senate and turned into law, because our communities demand it and Americans deserve it. Thanks.
Thank you, Congressman Moulton. Jamie Balsito, what actions have you taken, and what will you do in the future about gun violence?
I could continue to call Mitch McConnell's office till the cows come home, and that hasn't really done anything. And we need to make sure that the Senate is actually acting on the will of the people. There has been continued cries for this. Again, I'll reference my college days. Columbine happened in my college days. It's been quite a while since I was in college. And we've continued to kick this issue down the road. When I'm in Congress, what do I want to do? I want to start talking about how women are the ones suffering from gun violence, intimate partner violence, and how we are seeing an escalation in our domestic violence. And 80% of domestic violence leads to some sort of gun violence in that particular situation with women. We have a culture that's accepted rape culture, we accept intimate partner violence, we accept domestic violence in general, and talking about guns is part of that, because we continue to put women and children in harm's way, and my children aren't here to be the target for someone because we don't have the will or the gumption to do the work in DC. And so I can tell you what I did and what I plan on doing, and I look forward to making sure that this continued cycle comes to an end. Thank you.
Thank you. Another subject. Millions of Americans have recently lost their employer-based health insurance as a result of losing jobs from COVID-19. And the Supreme Court will be hearing a new challenge to the Affordable Care Act, which may result in the loss of health insurance by 23 million people. Nancy Meacham of Swampscott wants to know what steps Congress should take to ensure that all Americans have access to good, affordable, comprehensive health care. Jamie Balsito.
Sure. Thank you for bringing up this issue. You know, we see over 21 million people have no health insurance right now, individuals or families. We have about 45 million people unemployed right now. For us to think that the golden handcuffs between an employment situation and health care is the way for this country to approach this is egregious. We need to actually take a look at the ACA, which is 10 years old now, and start expanding the programs into the states, not giving them the opportunity to exempt themselves, but making them actually have to participate in this. I want to see an expansion of Medicaid right now. I want to see that this health care during a pandemic is realized that it's a public health crisis, that this isn't just a conversation we can have just for the fun of it. And part of this issue, too, we're seeing people in this district not go get COVID tests. Why? Because it's costing them $110, $120, and $160. How that's benefiting us in the time of a pandemic is beyond me. We need to act, and we need to act now. And we've been kicking the can down the road. The continued conversations we're going to have here tonight. And this is something I'm committing to, and I'm going to make sure that we take what we did in Massachusetts and that we fully implement it at the federal level. And I look forward to working with that with Joe Biden. Thank you.
Thank you. Congressman Moulton, what steps should Congress take?
Let's just be clear. Healthcare is a human right. And every single American deserves the best healthcare in the world. Why should it be any different? That's why I support President Obama's plan, his original plan, to have a public option alongside private insurance, a public option that competes with private insurance, so that the best plan may win. People have options. If you want to keep your employer-based healthcare plan, you can, but absolutely you should not be required to. It should not be required to have healthcare tied to your employer. But by having a public option that competes with private plans, it will bring down prices and improve outcomes for everybody. And you know what? If that public option outcompetes the private plans, some of which unions and other organizations have fought for long and hard, if the public option becomes better and it wins, then so be it. But that's how we should get to the standard that we have truly the best health care in the world. And I say this as one of the only members of Congress who actually gets single-payer health care, because I made a commitment to continue going to the VA even as a member of Congress. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. I have great primary care in Bedford. I feel like I'm in good hands. But I also got surgery shortly after I was elected in Washington, D.C., and was sent home with the wrong medication. What could have been a truly dangerous situation. I don't want people to be forced onto a plan like that, but I do want people in America to have choice, because healthcare is a human right.
Thank you. Angus Mcquilkin, what should Congress do to make sure everybody has good, affordable, comprehensive health care?
Thanks, Jim. I look at this from the perspective of a patient. I'm a cancer survivor, 12 years out. That's why I ride the Pan Mass Challenge every year. Most recently, yesterday, it was my 12th Pan Mass Challenge to raise money for the Dana-Farber. I got world-class care at the Dana-Farber. Until everyone has access to world-class care, our healthcare system isn't good enough. I also look at it from the perspective of a provider, because I was an executive at Planned Parenthood for 4 years and helped run clinics that served low-income populations where many people were paying out of pocket because they did not have access to health insurance. I think there's a number of things we need to do. I think we need to defend the Affordable Care Act and the progress we made there by ensuring that people do have access to their parents' health insurance till they're 26, protecting pre-existing conditions. It's all at risk, as we know, from the question as it was asked. It's before the Supreme Court, and people are trying to challenge the entire ACA. We need to protect the progress that we made. We then need to build on that progress. I am a supporter of expanding Medicare eligibility to age 60, lowering the age to 60, so that more people will have access to Medicare. That's something Joe Biden has proposed. I support that proposal. I think that'll cover a lot of people who need coverage. But then I agree we need a public option. We need to make sure it's affordable and robust. I think that it should not cost anybody more than 8.5% of their overall income to pay for the premiums for that public option. We need to protect reproductive health care. That's why I spent those years at Planned Parenthood and chairing the Mass Coalition for Choice. And we need to do better by our seniors in ensuring quality of care at our nursing homes and senior care facilities. It is grotesque that more than 60% of the COVID deaths were in those facilities here in Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. McQuilkin. Our media partner, the Lynn Daily Item, asks for your assessment of the current federal COVID stimulus aid to American businesses and individuals, and what additional aid you think is needed. So, your assessment of the current status and what else you think should be done. Ms. Balsito.
It's abysmal. I don't know how else we can talk about the fact that here we are. I got my mask off and a fan blowing on me, and we are still no farther down the road than we were on March 12th when the state shut down. We have no national strategy to take care of people. Our turnaround time for COVID testing is in upwards of 4 days, and I'm living in the best country in the world. We can do better. We're expecting our children to go back to school, and it's like playing Russian roulette with our teachers. We don't even have the appropriate PPE for our healthcare workers still. I'm hearing from friends of mine that are nurses that they don't even have the appropriate masks at Boston Children's Hospital right now. We have done nothing for the businesses back here. We have allowed big corporations, whether it was Ruth's Chris or a private institution like Harvard that got called out on the carpet and had to return their money. So we need to start taking a look at what's happening on Main Street here and how we're going to funnel and take care of our small businesses, our moms and pops, and our undocumented communities as well, because they live here. And that's something I'm committed to do with the Treasury and with the Fed to make sure that we get what we need back here to support our businesses.
Thank you. Congressman Bolton, your assessment of the current status and what should be done.
Look, the historic relief package that we passed in Congress has helped. The $600 has made a difference for the massive number of people who are unemployed. And we've worked hard in our office to make sure that small businesses in the district can get access to the loans that Congress made available. But the largest stimulus package in American history that I was proud to support, that I was proud to contribute to, as some of my bills were incorporated into it, it's still not enough. And the fact that the Senate is sitting on its hands now, right now, today, tonight, while we have passed the HEROES Act through the House of Representatives and refuses to even take it up, refuses to even establish their position on negotiations, that's not good enough. And this is one of the examples of why I fight so hard to get Democrats elected across the country. We do need to do better. But we're not going to get there with a hope and a prayer that Mitch McConnell will change his ways. We're going to get there by electing more Democrats across the country. That's why Serve America has endorsed both House candidates and Senate candidates, amazing leaders who can win seats and change our Congress so that we can pass the relief legislation that we truly need. We need to do more for small businesses. We need to do more for the unemployed. We need to do more for the environment and for transportation as we're making progress on these other things. That's what other leading countries in the world are doing with their COVID relief packages. We shouldn't be in second place.
Thank you, Mr. Moulton. Mr. McQuilkin.
So I believe we need to keep the resources flowing to support our small businesses. The Paycheck Protection Program was helpful, but only to an extent. We need more support for our innovation economy, for early stage startups. That's the lifeblood of our innovation economy in Massachusetts. Those programs did very little to support companies that are in need of things like working capital for research and development. We don't want to see the innovation that comes out of those companies come to an end, because that's what leads to future economic growth in Massachusetts. We need more support for women and minority-owned businesses. There should have been money, I would argue, specifically set aside for that from the outset. We need more support for our higher education sector, for nonprofits. We're going to need support for our tourism-related industries and important regional industries like the fishing industry. Now, the CARES Act had $300 million in it for the fishing industry nationwide. It was a drop in the bucket. It was far too little. I don't think anybody should claim success over that. But what I'm particularly concerned about is this. Not a dime of that aid has reached a single person who works in the fishing industry as of today. And it's been nearly 6 months. We have delivered billions of dollars in small business loans, billions of dollars in unemployment assistance, and people in the fishing industry have not received a single dime of that support. They're just starting to open up the application process now. I think that's a failure of government leadership. And frankly, I think our current congressmen should have held their feet to the fire to make sure that money got to people much faster when it was needed.
Thank you. Next question is from Renee Keeney, the chair of the Marblehead Democratic Town Committee. What kinds of structural changes would you support for closing the historically high levels of income inequality? Structural changes to address income inequality. Congressman Seth Bolton.
There is so much that we need to do. Income inequality has only gotten worse, and it's been exacerbated by the COVID crisis. There was a time when people thought that maybe this pandemic would be a great leveler because it would affect everyone evenly, and that has not been even close to the case. We all know that Black and brown Americans suffer far greater rates of infection and death from this terrible disease. So this should be a clarion call, if there wasn't one before, to finally change this. The problem, again, is that we can pass legislation in the House of Representatives that will make a difference. But we're not going to fundamentally change the Republican Party's support for the wealthy unless we beat them. And that's why it's so important that I helped turn this district from a seat that we barely held on to every year, that required national party money just to keep this seat, into a seat that's helped win Democratic seats across the country. We helped flip the House of Representatives in 2018, winning 22 seats, 18 of them flipping from red to blue, electing amazing people, including a historic number of women to Congress, many of them inspiring women veterans. This year, we're working to do the same in the Senate as well. And I'm so proud of the support of this district and being a partner in that effort to make sure that we're serving Democrats not just here at home, but across the country. In many ways, I think that work is some of the most important work that I've done for the people of Massachusetts.
Thank you, Congressman Moulton. Jamie Balsito, what structural changes would you support to address income inequality?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question, because literally we could talk about everything across the board, from healthcare to immigration, public education. I'm going to touch upon housing. I was speaking with the local realtor yesterday on how it is, just to make sure that my ears were hearing, how it is that people are able to get housing right now. And the fact of the matter is that it's taking about 50% of individuals' incomes in order to pay rent and a mortgage. Most people don't even believe that they can afford to buy a house, and so they're renting, and right now the average rental price in this district's $2,000. Our federal HUD for federal housing in this community, there's 2 housing facilities in Lynn, 2. It's a city that's 100,000. We need to be bringing more HUD funding federal housing into those communities. In another community I'm going to cite, Gloucester, 89 units of federal public housing. The entire system is set up for structural inequities at every bend. But if you don't have a place to lay your head at night, We need to make sure that access to housing is one of those issues that we're talking about when it comes to inequities. And I commit to making sure that the federal government starts to move and bring some money back to this district on that.
Thank you, Ms. Balsito. Mr. McQuilkin, structural changes to address income inequality.
Jim, I believe that access to quality education is the great equalizer in our society and is the greatest generator of income mobility that we have. I'm a product of public education, K through college, and a product of the University of Massachusetts. Our public higher education system in Massachusetts is no longer affordable. It was created to be the affordable option for working families. It now costs $42,000 a year to send your kid to UMass Amherst all in. $42,000 a year. That is not affordable. Our state universities are not affordable. Our community colleges are not affordable. We need to make a major investment in restoring the affordability of public higher education so that system can again serve as an avenue for people to achieve economic mobility. I agree with Jamie about housing, but my approach is a little different. I think that's number two, is housing. It's one of the greatest limitations on diversity in this district is people can't buy a home. Much of the housing production that's happening, a lot of it with federal support, and we need more of it, is rental units. And while those are important and we need more of them, we also need to give people avenues to home ownership, because building equity in home ownership is the avenue to having a quality of life that people deserve. It's the avenue to building wealth. And that was what the question was about. So I think we need to make more opportunities available for building equity and working towards home ownership. I also think we need to reverse the changes that Donald Trump pushed through on our tax code that gave tax cuts to rich people and hurt everybody else, because that's part of the income inequality in our society as well.
Thank you. Should we reassess how we think about defense spending and the use of military power? What should be changed? Angus Mcquilkin.
So this is an area where I and the incumbent differ sharply. I am somebody who, when it comes to foreign affairs, is an advocate for peace and use of diplomacy to achieve our goals in the world. And we need to rebuild those relationships once we remove this president from office, because they have been frayed and tattered. But we need to end endless wars, and we need to refocus our spending. Seth Bolton, and I always, when I meet veterans, I make it a point to thank them for their service, and I want to thank Seth for his service. But the fact is, he has been one of the most hawkish Democrats in Washington. He's a card-carrying member of the War Caucus in the House of Representatives, and he earned that card over again over the past 3 weeks by teaming up with Lynn Cheney, one of the most hawkish and conservative Republican House members, on an amendment to indefinitely extend the war in Afghanistan, a war that we should find a way to bring to a conclusion after 19 years, the longest armed combat in our nation's history. Then he became the only Democrat in our House delegation from Massachusetts to vote against an amendment that would have shaved 10% off of the enormous request for military spending, and put it towards domestic needs like education and health care and COVID relief. The only member of our House delegation to cast that vote. So Seth Bolton's a card-carrying member of the War Caucus. I think we need peacemakers in our House of Representatives. That's a fundamental difference between us that voters will have the opportunity to choose between.
Congressman Walton.
Look, I knew coming into tonight that I would get a lot of political mud slung at me. But let me assure you that there is nobody who wants peace more than those of us who have fought for it, who've had to put our lives on the line for this country, who have seen promising young Americans lose their lives, especially in wars that shouldn't have happened. I was very proud, and yes, I got a lot of flack for speaking out against the war in Iraq, even as I was proud to go so that no one had to go in my place. A lot of Democrats supported the resolution that my opponent just cited, because the worst thing that we could do in Afghanistan is bring the troops home and then have to send them back. That's exactly the mistake that we made in Iraq, and it won't happen again on my watch. I have been one of the strongest advocates for diplomacy in our Congress, because I've seen the consequences of when the State Department doesn't show up because they don't have enough resources. I've lived those consequences. I've done the job of the State Department on deployments to Iraq. And I agree with Secretary Mattis when he says, if you cut this Department of Defense budget, you're going to have to buy ammunition. So I know this issue personally because I've seen it measured in American lives.
Thank you. Jamie Balsito.
I appreciate the question. I'd like to take a moment to say I'm very proud to have been endorsed by the Massachusetts Peace Action Committee. That's something I'm very thrilled about. As I had mentioned earlier, I am a third-generation Syrian American, and I have family in the Middle East, and a lot of the discussion when it comes to military budget is affecting people who are actually related to me. And so this is something I'm very sensitive and aware of. We had $740 billion that was passed to the Pentagon. And again, we don't even have money in our school system right now for our kids to go back to school. And I'm saying that incredibly loud because that's where we need to be focusing on. We need to be focusing on access to COVID testing. We need to be focusing on getting our teachers and our children able to get back to school, which we shouldn't even actually be talking about because we're ill-prepared. We have buildings that are falling apart because when you put 50% plus of the discretionary budget in our legislature voting on for just military, and you give your public education system 6% if you're lucky, you get buildings that don't have appropriate air ventilation. You have buildings that are 3 floors high with 2 bathrooms in the first floor, and you're asking kids to go back to school to be separated 6 feet apart, no, I'm sorry, 3, and let their teachers not be able to help them, and then go down to the bathrooms and have no access to a disinfectant or anything for to make sure that they are able to be safe in their schools. That's what we need to be talking about.
Thank you. Judith Black of Marblehead would like to know if you believe there is a climate emergency. What policies do you suggest, do you support to address climate change? Green New Deal, carbon taxing, something else? Angus Mcquilkin.
So I released a comprehensive climate plan last week, and it's one of my 6 priorities for the 6th district because it urgently needs attention. We are seeing the results of the climate crisis already in this coastal district. I mean, I got my start in political organizing through the environmental movement while a student at UMass Amherst as a student leader of MassPIRG, the Massachusetts Public Interest Research Group. I ride across the Ipswich River every day on my daily bike ride. And what I see is record low water levels in the Ipswich River, which is just one impact that we're seeing from the climate crisis, and those impacts are accelerating. So we need to take urgent action. What my plan calls for is for us to re-engage in international climate talks. We don't have a seat at the table right now because our president doesn't believe in science and doesn't even want to acknowledge that there's a problem. We should be leading those global climate talks, but we're not even there. Then we need to embrace the Green New Deal and the framework of the Green New Deal. And the part of it that I'm most excited about is the opportunity to create a new green economy. And the reason I'm so excited about that is that it's an opportunity for Massachusetts. And our district, we lead the world in life sciences because we chose to. And we made the necessary investments in workforce development and technology and in every other way so that we could lead the world. We can lead the world in the new green economy, in the creation of the new technologies that can move the needle on climate if we make the right investments, show some vision, and have a good strategy. And by the way, I think a refundable carbon fee needs to be part of that package as well.
Thank you. Jamie Balsito, is there a climate crisis and what should we do?
There absolutely is a climate crisis. I keep hearkening back to Salem State or to Reading High School because my generation, Generation X, has been talking about this for 30 years now, and now we're being taken a look at that as the sand continues to go through the hourglass, we're losing time. Yes, I support the Green New Deal. I also want to go back to the military spending part of this. When we take a look at companies like Raytheon, of which I worked for and deployed people overseas to God knows where, I lasted about 6 months. We should be taking the people that are working at companies like that are main stakeholders in different political action committees, to make sure that individuals from the military continue to get voted into Congress, and make sure that we're taking the skill sets of the mechanical engineers, the fluid mechanical engineers, the fluid engineers, the engineers, and put them into environmentally sound jobs. This doesn't have to be an either or. This can be us moving towards a green environment, sustainable economy, and something that we can do here. We're also doing wind energy here. We're also investing in our marshes. And I also want to talk about clean water. I lived down the street from the Grace Company when I was growing up. We were not allowed to drink the water. And you know what? Kids still aren't allowed to drink the water. And I'm 46 years old. We need to start doing things that are taking care of the health and wellness of our communities. And that is part of the environmental plan.
Thank you. Congressman Bolton, is there a climate emergency, and what should we do?
Yes, absolutely. And my wife Liz and I do not want to hand a planet on fire to our 22-month-old daughter Emmy. We owe it to the next generation, and we owe it, frankly, to our generation, to solve this crisis and to lead the world in doing so. That's why I support the carbon tax. That's why I was one of the first members of Congress to sign on to the Green New Deal, so that I can help shape it as one of the only members of Congress with a degree in science. So real quickly, what do we need to do? We need to pioneer the world in carbon-free energy. New technology like what's being developed at MIT right now, we should sell to the rest of the world, not the other way around, where today we're buying solar panels from China. Second, we need to solve this problem for the developing world as well. That's something that's not a big enough component of the Green New Deal right now, but needs to be, because whether you like it or not, there's a lot of carbon coming from the developing world. And then a third thing we need to do, which I say from the perspective of my science background, but I know is more contentious politically, is talk about carbon capture. Because even if we stop putting carbon in the atmosphere today, there's still too much up there and we need to take it out. But we can do all this by growing our economy, by growing jobs, by selling this technology to the rest of the world. And we should also make changes right here at home in Massachusetts in terms of our transportation system, which is one of the biggest contributors to climate change. That's why I put out a comprehensive high-speed electrified rail program as part of our response to the COVID crisis. My opponents mocked that plan, but that's the kind of forward-looking future thinking that we need if we're going to solve this crisis and lead as Americans in doing so.
Thank you. We are actually doing really well on time. I'm going to ask a question that would have been the initial question, except we cut it out because we were trying to save time. So if it seems like stepping back a little, Terry John from Lynn would like to know what your major in college was, and what you have learned since college, and how did your education and later learning prepare you for this job? Congressman Moulton.
Well, thank you. Is it Gracie for the question? Was it Gracie?
Terry John.
Terry,
Terry
sorry.
John from Lynn.
The echo in here. Terry, thank you very much for the question. So as I alluded to, my degree is in science, specifically in physics. And it's given me an interesting perspective in Congress as one of the only people there who has a degree in science. Because there are an awful lot of people who agree across America that we would be making better decisions if we could simply believe in science, if we could take the politics out of policy making and do what the facts tell us to do. It's helped me be a leader in Congress on a number of issues, including climate change, but also transportation. It's helped me understand how we can reduce our defense budget. I'm the co-chair of the Future of Defense Task Force, the single Democrat that our House leadership picked to lead a look at how we can reform our defense and our national security for the next 30 years, and yes, reduce our defense budgets. I voted against that amendment because I think we can reduce our defense budgets by more than 10%, but we've got to be smart about how we do it. And a lot of that is through new advanced technology. And my degrees help me understand that. Thanks.
Thank you. Angus Mcquilkin, your college major and what you've learned since then that prepares you for this job.
I mentioned I'm a product of public higher education. I went to UMass Amherst, class of '91. College is a place to find yourself and figure out what you want to do, and it certainly was for me. I believe I went through 4 different majors before I discovered the one that really stuck. which was political science, and in my case, public policy. It was because of one great professor, a man named John Hurd, who ran a class where every class he got us all together in small groups, presented a societal problem, and then we had an opportunity to work as a group to try to figure out solutions. I got hooked. It's like there's lots of jobs where I can help people one at a time. Here's a role where I can help large swaths of the community through public policy. And then my first career was in that, serving as chief of staff for Senator Cheryl Jakes, where we built coalitions and passed legislation after legislation after legislation to, for example, make college more affordable in Massachusetts. So I applied that learning, and then I changed careers and went into communications and public relations, which is what I teach at LaSalle University. I had no formal training in that whatsoever, and now I do business development for a global law firm, and I had no formal training for that whatsoever. So what I've done is taken the foundation that I got at UMass, which was a terrific foundation. I had a wonderful 4 years there. I think very highly of it. I know all the other alumni in this district of UMass feel the same way. But I supplemented it with 50 years of life experience. And that's what's allowed me to take on a variety of different leadership roles throughout my career.
Thank you. Jamie Balsito, your college major and what you've learned since then.
Shockingly, Jim, it was political science. And I went to
Mine too.
Salem State College. I tore the back of the Salem State pamphlet. I tore out a piece of paper, a perforated piece of paper, and typed my name at the job I had after school 5 days a week when I was at Reading High, and sent it in and said, well, we'll see. And I ended up graduating as a political science major after working 3 jobs and accrued, umpteen thousands of dollars worth of debt that I had to pay off after I left. So going to college taught me how to prioritize. It taught me hard work. It taught me how to have grit and commitment, that this was something I was doing for myself, that there was no one backing me but me. Again, I was a first-generation graduate of our public higher ed system that is bleeding money right now because we aren't paying attention to our public education systems. I also want to speak about the fact that that led me to Joe Moakley. Hello to Professor Levy that retired. I fell in love with Latin American foreign policy. I've spent 20 years working as a John Tierney campaign volunteer to a congressional intern for Joe Moakley. I worked on immigration reform with Ted Kennedy, and I've changed how this country takes care of pregnant new mothers with Ed Markey, Catherine Clark, Ayanna Pressley, and Elizabeth Warren. So I'm ready to do the job.
Next question is on your personal priorities. What issues you consider most important immediately? Specifically, what are the 3 most important issues you will focus on starting in January? Mr. McQuilkin.
I will put my background in economic development to work on economic recovery. I think it's the front and center issue we need to confront. Massachusetts economy has taken a battering. We need to rebuild our innovation economy here. I have experience in doing exactly that, and I know how that can work. And I think our big opportunity economically, as I mentioned, is to lead the world in a new green economy, because we can lead in that too, create thousands and thousands of jobs in our region in the process. Gun violence. My mission is to pass meaningful and effective national gun laws. My role as an advocate won't be done. I won't hang up my shoes until that is accomplished. I will not take no for an answer on meaningful and effective national gun laws. That's why I have the gun sense candidate distinction from Moms Demand Action. And I think we need to prioritize that and build a big, broad-based national coalition of stakeholder support. So the first bill I would file would be a bill to replicate the Massachusetts model for gun violence prevention nationally. And then the third issue I would focus on is healthcare, because I think that the COVID-19 crisis has laid bare the inequities that we face in our healthcare system, and I think it's something that needs really urgent attention. But I have to add a fourth, because we have to address the climate crisis. It was a crisis stage before the current crises that we're facing, and we need to take urgent and meaningful action on the climate crisis.
Representative Moulton, 3 most important immediate issues.
I break this down into 3 categories: what we need to do at home, what we need to do internationally, and what we need to do politically. The number one thing we need to do at home is to actually start living up to our founding principles. And that encompasses issues like racial justice, climate justice, and the response to this COVID-19 pandemic. Internationally, we live in an increasingly dangerous world, and I will never forget what it means to put your life on the line for this country. To meet the challenges of this new world, we need a new generation of arms control, and alliances across the globe. And then finally, politically, we have got to flip more seats from red to blue. Because you're going to hear some great priorities up here tonight from all the candidates. But the sad reality is we're not going to get any of them through Congress with a fascist president and an obstructionist Senate. And that's why the political work that I'm doing through Serve America is so important. So important for this country, so important for this district, so important for the lives of the next generation of Americans.
Thank you. Ms. Balsito, three
Yes.
most important immediate issues.
Again, there's so many to unpack, and you're asking me for three. First and foremost, the residents and family of the 6th District come first. I'm interested in making sure that I serve the 6th District. And there's a lot of issues that are being talked about here locally. You know why? Because they aren't being addressed. And my family and your family is being affected by it. When it comes to the three issues that I feel that need to be addressed, I'd be looking at public education. I believe that that is going to intersect with how we handle our health care, our infrastructure, our economy, the environment, how we're going to rebuild and rethink our communities. We need robust funding right now to take care of our social safety nets, food, access to food in the school systems. It's become a social safety net, our schools, because we've paid no attention to making sure that our children are being taken care of in this country or in this district when it comes to getting federal funding. Health and wellness of women, we must address the root causes, again, of domestic violence, rape culture, sexual assault, and gun violence. We must protect women's reproductive care. I'm going to speak not on behalf of all women, but on behalf of the majority of women I know. They don't want to hear men talk about women's health anymore. They want women to be taking care of women's health. And immigration, this affects our economy. It affects the health and wellness of our families. It affects the safety of our community members. It's something I've been working on for over 20 years, and I commit to working on that.
Thank you. Now we'll go a little in the other direction. Mark Babineau, a sophomore at Marblehead High School, notes that the pandemic, environmental issues, and a failing economy have taken up a lot of space in public discourse. He'd like to know what overlooked area you're especially interested in that deserves attention but often doesn't get it. Ms. Balsito.
Again, I'm going to come to this from the perspective that I know best. Until I became a mother and until I got involved in trying to create changes for our communities, I never thought of myself as a woman or a mother. But I'll tell you, it's one of the hardest things I've seen get done is to have people listen to you as a woman in the halls of Congress, as a woman in the halls of our Massachusetts state legislature, and making people understand the health and wellness of our society should be based on the health and wellness of women. Maternal mortality in this country is off the charts. We don't care about women, and I'll give you another secret. We don't care about Black and brown and indigenous women. They're dying at 3 to 4 times the percent as our white counterparts. In babies, we have a rising infant mortality rate here in this country. And Black and brown babies are dying at a 2 times higher rate than our white counterparts. These are the things that need to be talked about. We may not be married individually, we may not have chosen to have children, but we are all here because of a mother. And that should be what judges society on. The health and wellness of our children and women, and that's something I'm looking forward to continuing to work on.
Thank you. Congressman Moulton, what's an overlooked issue that you're especially interested in that deserves more attention but doesn't get it?
Well, an issue that's overlooked nationally, although we do manage to talk about it here in Massachusetts, is transportation. And the reason I'm so passionate about transportation and about building a 21st century transportation system for Massachusetts and the rest of the nation is because transportation underlies so many other issues. Because transportation is about actually having access to housing. Right now in Massachusetts, we have a one-way commuter rail system that you can't even access the rest of the state from. You can get to Boston, just to the north side of the city, but that's it, which means that 2/3 of housing is cut off for people who want to have jobs in this district. Transportation also delivers access to education, that great equalizer that can allow everybody the opportunity to grow up and have a stronger future. And it's access to jobs, thousands of jobs that exist in this state, in this Commonwealth, but you can't get to right now. That's why I've released a comprehensive regional rail plan. It's something I've been fighting for since I was first elected. It's why I consistently support extending the Blue Line to Lynn. And it's why I've released a nationwide high-speed rail program, clean, electrified, safe high-speed rail that should be a part of our pandemic recovery. That's the future transportation system that the rest of the world is building, and we're not building here at home. And it will deliver more opportunity for more Americans.
Thank you. Angus Mcquilkin.
So, I mentioned at the outset I have 6 priorities, and that the reason I'm running for Congress is that none of them are getting enough attention in Washington. We're not making headway on anything that matters. We need urgent action, and we need leaders that can get results. You asked me earlier to name 3. I gave you 4. I actually have 6, so let's make sure that education and transportation are on that list. Those are my 6 priorities. Top 6 priorities for the 6th Congressional District, and people can learn more about them on my website, which is angusforcongress.com. I hope people will go there during this debate and check it out. And if you agree that these priorities need urgent attention, please contribute to this campaign for change. Volunteer, sign up to get involved with this campaign for change. But to expand that agenda a bit more, the issue is housing. Housing is not getting enough attention in this district, and it's an area that needs significant attention. I met a voter from North Andover recently. His name is Shafi. He's an immigrant from Uganda, paying more than 50% of take-home income in rent, and rent, and rent, and rent every month. No opportunity to build equity toward home ownership. I think we need to make some major changes in how we approach housing. We need to increase the pipe of federal funding, which is based in part on the census, so people need to fill out their census forms. Please fill out your census forms. But then we need to increase the amount per capita that goes to states so that we can increase the number of projects. We need to focus more on home ownership instead of just rental units, and we need to strengthen the Community Reinvestment Act to make sure that lenders aren't discriminating against people who are historically discriminated against in lending, which is one of the things that prevents them from being able to buy a home. Thank you.
Thank you, and that turned out to be a really interesting question. Thank you to Mark Babineau from Marblehead High School. We haven't let you respond to one another up until now. Thank you for your cooperation in all of that. But before your closing remarks, this will be your chance to respond. And there have been some interesting issues going back and forth where you have shown differences. And I'm actually going to extend the time a little for this. I think maybe we'll do 2 rounds. Starting with Congressman Moulton. Minute and a half, but we'll do 2 rounds. Sorry. Congressman Bolton, is there anything you'd like to follow up on that somebody else said or that you wish you had said?
Well, look, there's an awful lot of issues we didn't get to cover tonight. But look, I understand this is a political campaign and people are going to sling political mud. I'm not concerned about that. I've had much worse things shot at me in my life. But what we should be talking about is how we're going to take this country forward, how we're going to take this district forward. And that's what I'd like to focus on. How we're going to make a difference in the lives of everyday Americans who are suffering through the worst pandemic we've seen in a century. Yes, I'm proud to have voted for and influenced much of the legislation that we passed in the House of Representatives, including getting transportation funding dramatically expanded through a letter that I led with many colleagues in the House and the Senate, including getting our nonprofit bill integrated by Speaker Pelosi into the COVID legislation, and having my 988 bill. We haven't talked about mental health at all, and that's a huge issue in this crisis. My 988 bill, the National Mental Health Hotline, that is this close to being passed. It was included in the HEROES Act, thanks to the House leadership. It was already been voted on by the Senate, and it will start saving lives the day that it becomes law, because an awful lot of Americans are suffering the mental health consequences of this pandemic, and it's going to be with us for a long time. We have a lot more work to do in Congress, and that's why I was elected on a platform of change 5 years ago. I haven't been afraid of delivering change, and I'll continue to do that if I have the honor of earning your vote and being the next congressman for this district.
Angus Mcquilkin, and this is not your closing, so you will still get your chance to do your 2-minute closing. Angus Mcquilkin, anything that you want to respond to that was said earlier tonight, or follow up on, or wish you had said?
I think we need a member of Congress who has the right priorities. And I've laid out my top 6 priorities. They're not everything I'd work on. Now, there's a crisis a day in this country right now, right? You'll work on a lot of things, but I think it's important you state what your priorities are so people know what you're going to work on first. And people can rely on the fact that I will prioritize those 6 priorities as key priorities as your next member of Congress. But our priorities differ. You know, each of our priorities differ, but my priorities differ markedly from the priorities we've seen from our incumbent congressman. And we've heard him talk about priorities tonight, but those haven't been his real priorities. Everybody watching this debate across the district knows what his 3 real priorities have been. Number 1, try to oust Nancy Pelosi from the speakership, through which he gave up his seat at the table. And that means we don't have a seat at the table, we don't have an influential member of Congress, and so we've lost our voice. Priority number 2, run for president. Right? That was strike 2, right? And I think what it revealed is we have a member of Congress who's focused on the job he wants next and not the job he has now. And then strike 3, and I just need to go back to it, was this decision on his part to become the only Democrat in the entire House to sponsor this resolution to blame China for the coronavirus. It was a straight-up Trump xenophobic messaging piece. I'm still scratching my head about why he chose to sign on to that. It was the wrong priority. So that's 3 strikes and you're out. And when you're out, you go back to the dugout, you let somebody else come up to bat. That's what I think we need to do in this district.
Thank you. Jamie Balsito, anything you'd like to respond to or expand on?
Sure, I appreciate the opportunity. You know, I'm excited to have seen that a lot of, not a lot, all of the issues I've been working on for years, women's health, immigration, mental health, have all been pushed in a much different direction in this conversation as it relates to the district. They've been poorly underfunded, absolutely overlooked, never a part of the conversation, and over the past 5 years, we're starting to ramp that up, and I have to say I'm excited that I'm in the race because I think that that has pushed it. I want to talk about the fact, again, we have no national strategy. The chief of the CDC said he was going to cover all COVID testings. We're getting charged individuals $160 to get the COVID tests. They're not going to get them. I haven't heard a peep up here about what's happening. They want to know about economic development in Lynn. What are we doing to keep the people in Lynn healthy? And I also want to bring that up to what we're doing in regards to COVID with our education system. The state of Massachusetts received $51 million in discretionary dollars for the governor to address the emergency situation in our schools. And $51 million in PPP loans went to private schools in this district alone. And my school has no plan for my kids to go back. That to me is egregious. I'm sorry, Congressman, you and the congressional representatives need to answer to parents like myself why our kids do not have, and the teachers, not just the kids, why do our schools not have what we need, and why do the private schools have $51 million in their hands right now, and our public schools have nothing?
Thank you.
Jim, I think I get
Congressman, you've been mentioned a couple times.
I've got
here.
mentioned a couple times. There's a very simple answer: the Republican-led Senate.
No,
And
but
that's
we're
why it
talking
has
about
to...
the CARES Act is what I want to know. Why hasn't the
Ms.
money come
Balsito,
back
excuse
to
me,
the
Ms.
districts?
Balsito,
So the way
we had agreed on rules here.
The way Congress works is that to get it passed into law, we had to negotiate with the Republican-led Senate. They put those provisions in there, and that's why it's so important that we get change in Congress. I was elected on a promise to deliver change, and I've kept that promise. Now, why did I challenge Speaker Pelosi? Because I kept that promise. I've also praised her for doing a very good job of standing up to Donald Trump, because I realize that there's a time to vote for captain and there's a time to play on the same team.
How are you taking care of the schools, Seth? I want an
Ms.
answer.
Balsito, we had agreed on rules. Can
But
you
we're
let the
talking about Trump, and we need to be
Can you let
focusing
the
on the families
congressman
and
speak?
residents of the district.
We reached a deal to ensure the next generation of leadership would have a voice, and then I was proud to vote for her and support her. And we've worked together. That's why 988 is in the HEROES Act. That's why my nonprofit bill got incorporated into the CARES Act. That's why the Brandon Act was part of the defense bill to ensure better mental health care for our veterans. That's why she asked me to travel with her to honor the veterans of World War II who fought at the Battle of the Bulge. And then she shared the story of my grandfather on the House floor. Am I effective? Name another representative who's brought over $1 billion back to this district, back to his or her district. Look, Speaker Pelosi has moved beyond this fight, clearly. I've moved beyond it. It's only my opponents who want to drag us backwards. Now, quickly, on running for president, look, I love this job, and I love this district. I ran for president because I love this country. And I think that when the country is under assault by a man like Donald Trump, you do everything you can to fight for it. I want to be able to tell my 22-month-old daughter, Emmy, that I did everything I could to defeat Donald Trump, and I didn't think there was a better person to take him on as commander-in-chief, which is where he's weakest, than the only combat veteran in the race. And then quickly, I'm going to ask for a slight extension because I was interrupted. Just very quickly.
We added to that time, so, and we want to save the time for your closing, so add it to your closing.
All right, Jim, thank you.
Okay. Mr. McQuilkin.
I think one of the fairest areas of criticism and scrutiny for a candidate is where they raise their money and how they raise their money. That's why we require to disclose campaign contributions, so everybody knows where your campaign money comes from. And this is an area of significant difference between myself and the incumbent. I don't take corporate PAC money, for example. He does in substantial amounts. But there's an issue that really needs to be addressed in this race, and the issue is this. Seth Bolton took over $78,000 in political contributions for his very many different committees. It's a maze you can't even figure out. He's a poster boy for campaign finance reform in Washington because he takes advantage of every loophole there is. But he took over $78,000 in contributions from a donor who's been directly tied to the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, who has been accused credibly by one of the girls as being someone she was forced to have sex with by Jeffrey Epstein. And that money is still in his account.
No,
in September
it's not.
Of last
I return
year,
the money.
This is my turn, please. In September of last year, he sought to divest himself of $5,000 out of $78,000. That's less than 10% of the dollars. And he took it from his PAC, not from his own campaign committee, in which he received $13,000 in direct contributions from these donors, and it's still there. This is not okay. Seth Bolton said he was going to go and change Washington. The fact is, Washington has changed him. You cannot have over $70,000 in tainted campaign contributions sitting in your campaign accounts and not give it up and give it away. So I ask Seth Bolton now, are you going to be a stand-up guy? Are you going to divest the $70,000 in campaign contributions from a donor tied to the Jeffrey Epstein scandal?
Please save the response for your closing, but what I'm going to do, because this is getting interesting.
Jim, with all due respect, that is an absurd allegation, and it deserves a quick response right now. Let me just say this.
I'm going to add a minute
I
to
have
your...
returned every single penny of that
Mr.
money.
Moulton.
Not actually returned it, as you suggest.
Mr. Moulton.
I don't know why you would give money back to someone who's alleged to have a connection to a pedophile.
Mr. Moulton, I will add a minute to your closing time.
Thank you, sir.
I tried to enforce it against Ms. Balsito, and I will with you too.
Fair enough.
Ms.
Thanks, Jim.
Balsito, a minute and a half. This is still the back and forth, following up. I know you wanted to say some things earlier. You have a minute and a half now to say what you were trying to say earlier, and then you will each get 3 minutes for a closing.
It's a lot of minutes to compile here, Jim. Thank you. I'm very impassioned about the fact that I've been on the phone constantly for months with colleagues of mine that are school committee members, teachers, paraprofessionals. I'm a trustee at Salem State. We're taking a look at cutting into bone, where we are laying teachers off and then telling teachers that they need double capacity. It doesn't make any sense. And I appreciate what the congressman is saying about the HEROES Act. Yes, we have seen the Senate hold this hostage. People are waiting for unemployment benefits. People are waiting for monies to come in. That's probably one of God knows how many more stimulus packages. But we need to ask the question, why did our private schools and institutions receive money and our public education has not? In this district, why are we still paying out of pocket for COVID testings? And why is Salem State prepared to spend $600,000 on PPE? And why my tiny little hamlet of Topsfield in the elementary school system is planning on paying over $100,000 for PPE, one mask per child. And unfortunately, this is the same discussion from Billerica to Marblehead, Salem to Lynn. It doesn't matter. People they need answers. They need answers, and we aren't getting any. And so I want to understand, where is the money?
Thank you all. It is now time for a closing. and we will add another minute. The order of the closing was determined by drawing lots at the beginning, and it will begin with Congressman Moulton.
I want to thank all of you for tuning in tonight. This conversation is important. Now, my opponents have made a number of false accusations about me tonight. That's why people hate politics. I don't mind, but the facts do matter. No, I did not endorse racist Republican language on China. I spoke out against it. I didn't ignore advocacy work on maternal mental health. I co-sponsored the legislation Representative Clark introduced that Jamie claims I ignored. I didn't keep campaign money from an accused pedophile. I returned it immediately. I'm proud of my record, and I just wanted to take a moment to set it straight. You know, I've been thinking a lot lately about a mentor of mine, my friend John Lewis, who encouraged everyone to be kind to each other, to fight for change, and to get into good trouble. I've taken that to heart. We may not always agree on how I've gone about trying to make change happen, but I think everyone recognizes that our country must change, and Congress has a responsibility to lead in those efforts. When it comes to Congress, there's a reason why we can't get bolder change or guns through. There's a reason why only just this year did we pass an anti-lynching bill and police reform in the House. It's because the leaders in Washington aren't working for us, especially the fascist in the White House and the morally bankrupt Republican-led Senate. So I'm going to keep pushing Congress to change. I'm going to keep causing that good trouble because I have faced the worst consequences of a Congress that doesn't do its job. I've seen what happens when the people who represent you don't fight for you. When people vote out of convenience, when people are reelected for decades because they promise to do what's popular rather than what's right. I've seen that cost in a deeply personal way. I fight so hard because I don't want anyone else to be put in that position. So I want you to know that the promise I made to fight for you 5 years ago is a promise that I will keep. To fight to change Congress, to fight for a country that's safer and stronger. It's a promise I will always keep to the people of this district. It is an honor to represent you. And I hope that I can earn that honor again for the next 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Moulton. Jamie Balsito, 3 minutes.
Thank you. You know, I'm here for the people. I'm not here for any political reasons. I don't come from a political family. My father's a rug layer. It's not like he knows somebody to get me a job. I'm here based on hard work and listening to the place that I grew up in. I am the regular, everyday person that all of this stuff is affecting. And I'm fed up. I just happen to know how the system works down there because I've been doing it for 20 years based on my own gumption and based on my own grit. And yes, you did sign on to something that we habitually asked you to sign on for like 6 months, and you told us in a room full of people that it wasn't a priority of yours, and so that was an issue. But you are a dad now, and things have changed, and I'm glad to hear that you're focusing on maternal health, and that you're partnering with Lauren Underwood, and that you're focusing on those things, because that is something we need to talk about. The residents and the families of this district come first. I don't believe that Wall Street and political action committees 1 to 2 to 7 have a place in this district. I am here to fight the fight of the people. I know how the system works. I know how the sausage is made. I have wonderful relationships with individuals in the congressional delegation that I have had for over 20 years. I know how to work both sides of the aisle. I'm not interested in partisan politics that are going to stranglehold the entire country and our district. I want to bring communities to the table. I want to network. I want to make sure that Lynn Main Street is aware of the funding that's coming out of the federal government the same way that the big tech corporations or the missile defense corporations are aware of it in Andover, North Andover, and in Burlington. I want to make sure that the constituents of this district feel like they have the ear of their congressional representative, and that I'm here for one job and one job only, and that is to be the congressional representative of the 6th District, where I was raised, where I benefited from the public school system, where I want your children to benefit from the public school system if we could appropriately fund it. This pandemic has given us pause to address things from Black Lives Matter, racial and social economic equity, and how we view public education. I am here running for Congress because I had an access to public education. I want to take care of our seniors. I want to make sure that people feel a part of their representative. And I have had the best time on this campaign trail getting to know all of the people in the district, and I commit to being available and doing the work because I am a workhorse and I am not a show pony. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Balsito. Angus Mcquilkin.
I want to thank the hosts and the sponsors and our moderator for this important conversation tonight. And I think it was an important conversation that it helped voters see the differences between us and will help them make an informed choice. I want to use my time just to set the record straight on a couple of things, and then I'll just share my closing remarks. Seth, you did support, you were the only Democrat in the House to sponsor the resolution to blame China for the coronavirus. It's well documented. It was on the front page of the newspaper. Now, you might have changed your mind a day later after we called you out on it, but you did sponsor it, and you can't sit here and say that you didn't. And, you know, I want to quote Roger Lau, who was the former campaign manager of Senator Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign, about that resolution that you were the only Democratic sponsor of. It's lazy scapegoating, hateful fear-mongering, and just flat-out dangerous. It was the wrong priority. I also want to set the record straight on this question about funding from a donor tied to Jeffrey Epstein. You can't hide behind a campaign spokesperson this time. You have to answer for it yourself. Your own campaign team said that you divested only $5,000 of those resources, claiming that you had spent the rest or contributed it to other candidates, which means that you got the benefit of it. You got the benefit of it. And $13,000 of those dollars went direct to your congressional campaign committee, and you haven't divested a single dime of that. I invite the media here today to check this out. Track it down, right? See who's right. All right, unless you've had a change of heart and you divested the money in the past 2 weeks since I challenged you on this, but if so, I'd love to hear about it. All right, but I don't think that's what we're talking about here. So trace it down till you get to the truth. So there's a clear choice in this election. There's a choice between the status quo and change. For voters who think everything is great and our society is going in the right direction, you have a choice, right? You can vote for the incumbent. You'll get more of the same. If Seth Bolton had the skill or the will to create change, he would have done that by now. We need a member of Congress with a model for change. Somebody with a record of achieving change, as I have done for the past 30 years, and with the right priorities. And we need a member of Congress who shows up. I've been serving this district all around in these communities. I cleaned up the beaches in Marblehead. I cleaned up trash in Salem. I helped run a food drive in Tewksbury. I handed out masks to commuter rail stations all around the district in recent weeks. I have seen Seth Bolton. I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen Seth Bolton. And I've been at this for over a year. And that's the number one piece of feedback I hear about our member of Congress, is he's never around and he doesn't show up. People should have access to their member of Congress. It is part of the job to be available, accessible, and present. I don't think that we're getting that. I am the only lifelong progressive Democrat in this race. Seth hasn't been a progressive. Jamie hasn't been a Democrat. As was mentioned, she supported the Republican candidate for this seat in 2014, wanted to increase the Republican majority in the U.S. House. We need a standard bearer for this party that's been a lifelong progressive Democrat fighting with you. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. McQuilkin. Thank you to all three of you for being here tonight in the first forum of this primary race. The voting is September 1st. You can now request your absentee ballots and vote by mail at any time. There were some interesting discussions tonight, and it seems like it will probably be the start of some future conversations. So on behalf of the Democratic Town Committees of Marblehead, Swampscott, and Nahant, and the media sponsors, the Daily Item of Lynn and Lavos, thank you all three.
Jim, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the committees as well.
And vote
Thanks,
September
everybody.
1st. Thank you.
Or earlier.
That is right.